It's midnight in rural Maharashtra. A young man named Vijay is walking alone down a thin dirt path, completely isolated by towering walls of sugarcane. Without warning, the heavy, humid air turns completely frigid. A sudden whispering sound erupts right by his ear, and the crops begin to violently thrash, as if a massive, unseen weight is rushing toward him. Before he can run, an invisible grip locks onto his body. He loses all motor control. The force twists his limbs into sharp, agonizing angles, bending his spine backward and forcing his eyes up into his skull. He tries to scream, but only a gurgle escapes. Just as his bones are about to snap, a local villager named Vittal approaches with a flashlight. The moment the beam hits the path, the grip releases, and Vijay collapses into the dirt. The violence ended as if a switch had been flipped. There was no gradual fading or lingering tremor. The entity simply retreated the moment it was seen. This wasn't a biological collapse. It was a tactical withdrawal. Back in the village home, Vijay lies paralyzed on a wooden cot. His mother, who moved to the city years ago, watches her son in terror, her mind racing toward medical explanations like a sudden stroke. But Vittal, who has lived in these fields his entire life, offers a different name for what he saw in the sugarcane. He calls it Karni, black magic. Look at this schematic of the human nervous system. A stroke originates as a localized failure inside the brain, usually causing the muscles to go limp. But Vijay's limbs were pulled outward, snapped into rigid, unnatural shapes by an external manipulation, much like a puppet being yanked by its strings. This leaves a glaring question. Vijay is a city dweller who hasn't set foot in this village for 10 years. Why would a highly localized rural curse target a man who seemingly has no connection to this land? The answer is buried in the history of the village itself. It's been a decade since Vijay's family last visited, but in that time, the silence has been filled by a growing family feud. From the high-rises of Mumbai, Vijay's family saw the ancestral land as a legal asset. They believed their bloodline and the deeds in their safe gave them an absolute right to the property. But his uncle Raghunath stayed behind in this weathered house. While the city relatives lived in comfort, Raghunath spent every morning in the dirt, keeping the farm alive through a decade of grueling labor. Visualize this conflict as a balancing scale. One side, a legal deed. The other, sweat equity, the thousands of hours Raghunath invested in the soil. When the grandparents were bedridden, Raghunath fed them until their final breath. To him, this elder care meant ownership. When the law only recognizes a signature on a document, it erases 10 years of sacrifice. That sense of total erasure is what turns a quiet uncle into a man desperate enough to seek out the village fringe. When Vijay returns to the village and demands a share of the profits, Raghunath sees a stranger trying to harvest his life's work. His anger moves past words and settles into a willingness to use any means to protect his land. He walks past the village limits to a gnarled ancient tree. In local folklore, this isn't just a landmark, it's a site where residents have historically gone to invoke dark spirits to settle their grudges. The ritual requires a specific physical action. Raghunath writes his nephew's name on a scrap of paper and pins it into the rotting bark with a rusted needle, symbolically anchoring his resentment to a specific target. The mechanism of Karni acts as a conduit. It takes Raghunath's human fury and converts it into a physical weapon, capable of tracking Vijay into the fields and literally twisting his bones. Back in the house, as Vijay shivers in his bed, his mother continues to insist that they have no enemies. To her, evil is something that comes from the outside. But folklore horror reveals a more uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous threats in these stories don't lurk in the woods. They share your last name and sit directly across from you at dinner. These accounts of black magic track the same lines as a probate court. The curse follows the scent of blood and inheritance, turning the dinner table into a battlefield where the weapons are ritualistic rather than legal. Raghunath likely watched his nephew eat just hours before the attack. He sat in the same room, maintaining the mask of a grieving uncle, while knowing exactly what he had pinned to that tree in the dark. The entity in the sugarcane field is a nightmare, but it is only the effect. The true monster is the human resentment that could drive a man to break his own nephew for a piece of dirt.